How's everybody doing today?
Good.
Is everybody getting hungry? A lot of people must be hungry by now, I would imagine. So my name is Chris Odom. I am the author of the Open Transaction System, and I'm also the co-founder of Monetos, which is building software based on open transactions. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about where our industry is moving and sort of where I got started first thinking about OT. And then I'm going to take a bunch of questions, do some Q&A at the end. I don't want to keep you guys for too long because I know everyone must be starving by now. So, yeah, I don't know how many people know this, but when I first started writing OT, I was already the owner of a company, and I was doing pretty well. I was living in Hollywood, right up in the Hollywood Hills, right under the Hollywood sign, and life was going well. You know, we had a lot of parties. We have a Halloween party. We have a New Year's Eve party. And in January 1st, 2010, we're having our New Year's Eve party. And a semi-famous hacker came over to the house by the name of Sammy. Does anyone know who that is? Sammy?
Sammy is my hero.
Yep, Sammy is my hero. That's exactly right. Sammy was the guy who, he invented the MySpace worm, which ended up taking down MySpace. And then, of course, he had the FBI banging on his door after he did that. I don't remember exactly how he did it, but basically if you got infected with the virus, or it was more like a MySpace worm, it wasn't a virus, but it would get onto your account and it would add Sammy as your friend, and then it would send itself to all your other friends, and then all of them would add Sammy as their friend, and so on and so forth. And so he logs into his MySpace, and he can see his number of friends is just growing dramatically by the second. You know, first he has like 1,000 friends, and he has 100,000 friends, and he has 3 million friends, and then MySpace goes down. So, another thing that he's sort of famous for was he invented something called the Ever Cookie. You guys ever heard of the Ever Cookie? The Ever Cookie is a cookie that you cannot erase off of your computer. Because what it would do is it would install itself in all these sort of non-standard places. It would put itself in your flash memory and all these other places wherever he could think to stick the data. And then if it ever got erased out of any of those places, as long as it was still there in just at least one spot, then the next time it runs, it would go and install itself to all those places again. So he invents this cookie that's basically impossible for people to remove from their computer, purely as a research exercise. He got a lot of press off of that. Anyway, we were throwing a big party for New Year's Eve up in our house up in the Hollywood Hills. And like I said, I had a successful company. I was doing well. Life was good. We were traveling a lot. And Sammy comes over, and I guess he had been talking to a friend of mine who knew that I had this obscure interest in digital cash software. And he had started to get interested in it for some reason. He had a lot of eclectic interests. So he approached me at the party, and he said, well, I heard that you are into this digital cash stuff. Can you tell me a little bit about it? And I said, well, I haven't really thought about it for years. When I first started looking at this stuff was in the 90s. The untraceable digital cash in the 90s gotten a lot of press, and a lot of people were interested in it at that time. I was interested in it, reading up on it and so on. And I even looked into writing some digital cash software, especially some sort of digital cash GUI or wallet. And as I started looking into it, I started to realize, this is back in the 90s, I started to realize that there are a lot of pieces just not there. There are a lot of pieces that needed to be written that had not been written yet. I found I could download a library that would do some blinding math, but it wasn't enough to write a GUI for. You had to have this whole transaction engine would need to exist first, not just the math. And so at some point I just dropped interest, and I moved on and did other things. And it was only 2010, January 2010, when Sammy was at my party asking me about it, that it sort of sparked my interest again to go back and look into the field and see what had been done and what was out there. Because I thought, there must be something out there by now that I could use, some sort of open source transaction engine. And so I went back and started researching up on everything that was out there again. And there were some cool things. For example, Bitcoin was out there, 2010, it was around. And that was pretty cool. There was another project that I thought was cool called Loom. I don't know if too many people have heard about that, by Patrick Shkorev. And then there's another system that I found very inspiring, which was called True Ledger by Bill St. Clair. And True Ledger, what was interesting to me about that system was that it did destruction of account history, which means it's able to prove everything without storing any of the receipt history, as long as it has the latest receipt, the last signed receipt. As long as you have the last signed receipt, you can prove all the balances. You could prove which instruments were still valid and which transactions had closed, and you didn't have to store any other transaction history. So I thought that was very interesting. There are all these different pieces, all these different projects that did some interesting piece that was very interesting to me. But what I did not see was, even to this point, I still did not see a transaction engine that did all the things that seemed necessary to me. I just couldn't believe it. I thought, I can't believe that it's 2010 and I haven't looked at this stuff in 10 or 15 years. And still, there's not an open source transaction engine that can do secure receipts and secure transactions, secure market trading, and all these sorts of things. And we need one. We need the ability to process transactions securely. We need the ability to prove things, to prove whether you paid or whether you didn't pay, or whether some instrument is valid and so on, without having to rely on an institution to stand there and provide that for you, but instead just being able to use digital signatures. The technology exists to prove things with a signature. It just needed to be built into some sort of engine. And the more I thought about it, especially given the state of the world today, the banking system, just the way everything is structured today, the more I realized that it was a moral imperative to write something like this. It wasn't something that I was going to make a lot of money off of. It wasn't something that I could see starting some company at the time. It just seemed like it was a moral imperative. It has to be written for the simple reason that it has to exist. People have to be able to use it. And more importantly, from my perspective, I want to be able to use it. I wrote it thinking, I want to be able to use this. I want to have this power, and the math exists. So why don't I have a system where I can just use it? It made me think of that old quote. Has anyone heard the quote, "Cypherpunks write code"? Cypherpunks write code. So in my case, apparently they had not. Years had gone by, and I started to think, maybe cypherpunks don't write code. Maybe they just talk a lot and then don't write anything, and then decades later I have to write the damn thing myself. So I started working on it. I basically dropped all my other activities with my other business partners and my other company, and I was able to take a few years off work and just completely devote myself to it. 100% of my time, up all night coding for several years without focusing or working on any other project. And I'm sure my wife thought I was crazy. Did you think I was crazy? Or?
Yeah. I was annoyed.
She was annoyed. She thought I was crazy.
Are you crazy?
Maybe a little. But it needed to be done, and it's sort of like whenever I've written a book, you sort of get to this point where you have this very clear picture of this thing in your mind, and you just have to go and put it down on paper. And that's how I felt with this project. I started to feel a very clear picture of the core engine and the different pieces and just everything that needed to be there. And I thought, if I don't sit down and type this out, then maybe no one will. Maybe I'll just never be able to use it, which is what I really wanted. But it seemed very clear to me, though, that it was a moral imperative, and it had to be done, almost as if I had no choice about it. And it was a sacrifice. It was a sacrifice to me because I spent a lot of my personal time working on it. I set aside any business concerns to work on it and made it a priority. And it made me think, sometime in the past few years, you guys remember what happened to Aaron Swartz. Aaron Swartz was being persecuted by the government and committed suicide. And he had written a manifesto, which, by the way, I encourage everyone to read. He wrote something called the Guerilla Open Access Manifesto. Anyone heard of that? And at some point I was reading the news, and I could see that the Department of Justice specifically targeted him. Not so much for his activities of what he was doing, because of his manifesto. They targeted him because in his manifesto, he said, "This is a moral imperative." He said the open access to information is a moral imperative. Those same two words that I had been speaking on the internet when people asked me why I wrote OT. And it just makes you wonder, where's this country going? Where's this country going that people who feel compelled to act for moral reasons are targeted by their own government? And so one announcement I'm going to make just really quick right away is I'm leaving the country and I'm moving to Switzerland. Thank you. And I'm American to the core. I'm a very patriotic American. But the company that I've started is probably not best started in America. We've incorporated in Switzerland. We have our office in Switzerland. And within a few weeks or maybe a month or two, I will be in Switzerland. And it's strange to think that I'll be learning to speak German so that I can move to a free country. Ausgezeichnet. So, my friend Justice, he was mentioning something to me the other day about the reversibility in our existing payment system. He said, if someone kidnaps the kid of the president of the Federal Reserve and threatens him, send a bank wire, send $1 million to this bank account, or you'll never see your kid again. See, people couldn't get away with that sort of thing because our system that we have today is reversible. It takes a week or two for these sorts of transactions to happen, and then they can go and reverse them months later. And of course, in that sense, it's actually good because you don't want criminals to be able to commit crimes and threaten people. But it's not good in the way that it was implemented. It's bad, right? The way it was implemented to have a reversible system, it puts us in a situation where someone has to be in control of what's going to be reversed. And when are we going to reverse, or what are we going to reverse? Which ones get reversed and which ones don't. You have to have a system that creates rules about this and has their hand on the switch and can make these sorts of decisions. I just want to read you a little quote here that I put up from Satoshi, which I found very interesting. By the way, did you guys see that Newsweek believes they found him? We found him! They pull him up from under a rock. He's like, leave me alone, leave me alone! Poor guy. Yeah, he denied it. Must not be him. Yeah. But think about this, though. Someone could put a gun to Mt. Gox. You can't do that with the Fed, but you could do that with Mt. Gox, right? Maybe someone put a gun to Mark's head and said, give me 800,000 Bitcoins or I'll shoot you a bunch of times. And don't tell anyone about it or we'll come back later and shoot you again. And so Mark just turns over the coins, right? Now, that's probably not what happened, but it's possible, right? You said, it's possible. It could happen. The only way to prevent something like that from happening is if Mark himself didn't have the power to transfer those coins. If he doesn't have the power to transfer those coins, then there's no longer any incentive to put a gun to his head and demand that he do so. Right? It protects him. We do not have these sorts of systems yet in the Bitcoin world. We're running around busily building all these trusted centralized entities who can then fail through incompetence or through persecution or through criminal threats and so on. And then we're finding one by one as these systems fall over and collapse that it just doesn't work, that our money is vulnerable to people who we trust with our money. So here's a quote from Satoshi I just wanted to throw out there. With the possibility of reversal, the need for trust spreads. Merchants must be wary of their customers, hassling them for more information than they would otherwise need. Interesting, right? And of course, I thought to myself, also with the possibility of reversal, you have to trust the authorities who have their hands on that switch. Who do we trust with that power? How do we elect these people or appoint these people? Power that ends up being abused. I think we've been using fake money for so long that now that we actually have real asset-based money again, we're forced to deal with these new problems that we're not accustomed to dealing with. We're not used to dealing with the fact that you could put a gun to someone's head and transfer 800,000 Bitcoins and disappear. Because in the old world, oh, well, you know, in the legacy banks, you could just reverse it. And now we can't. So what's the solution? Is the solution that we need to add reversibility? That's what the authorities would say. They would say this system isn't reversible. It's not regulated by any proper authorities. Well, here's another thing Satoshi said I want to throw out there. He said, transactions that are computationally impractical to reverse will protect sellers from fraud. And routine escrow mechanisms could easily be implemented to protect buyers. So in my mind, it's not that we need to have reversibility in our system. I think that's just a poisonous drink. I think what we need to do is build in these routine escrow mechanisms that Satoshi was talking about years ago. Years ago, he said we need to have these escrow mechanisms, but everyone just runs and puts their coins on some exchange that doesn't support that doesn't have voting pools or multi-sig built into their core. And I think you just have to lose a lot of money before you realize you don't want to get burned anymore. For anyone who hasn't seen, by the way, I recommend go on to the Bitcoin Talk forum. You can find it through Google, and look for the list of scams and heists and hacks that have plagued this community for several years now, and it's just epic, the list and the amounts of money that have been stolen each time until we get it right. So that's what we're working on. And that's basically all I wanted to say today, but I'm going to take questions if anyone has any questions about open transactions, about the technology, or anything else.
Excuse me, is the sound on for the mic?
Is the sound on for the mic?
Test. Test.
It's number 6.
Thank you. So my name is Christoph Atlas. I'm researching and writing about the area of Bitcoin privacy and cryptocurrency privacy. And I'm particularly interested in the capabilities of open transactions to do things like blind signatures and basically contribute to financial privacy for people. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what the capabilities are for open transactions, what your plans are for in the space, and where you see open transactions fitting in in terms of privacy for cryptocurrencies, as opposed to the cryptocurrencies actually going ahead and implementing this stuff themselves, like Zero Coin or whatever it is that they want to do?
Oh, okay, that's a good question. He's asking about blind signatures, right? What does OT do with blind signatures? So, what is a blind signature? A blind signature, well, a digital signature is where I take a piece of data and then I put a digital signature on it. And the way you do that is you hash the data and then encrypt it with a private key. So then later on, only the public key could decrypt it. And anyone else has the public key, so then they can hash the same data and compare the two. And if the hashes match, then the data must have been signed by the corresponding private key, and the data could not have been changed since then. So it proves that a certain person signed it, and also proves that the data has not changed since then. But it actually is possible to change the data in certain ways and cause the signature still to verify. And that's what a blind signature is. A blind signature, you take a piece of data and encrypt it, and then someone else signs it, not able to see what it is because it's encrypted. So he signs it, sends it back to you, and then you decrypt it, and the signature is still good. And that makes it possible to do untraceable transactions. And we do have that implemented in open transactions. We used a library called Lucre, which was written by Ben Laurie. Ben Laurie made a library, Lucre, which is an implementation of a variant on Chaumian blinding. David Chaum sort of invented the blind signature in the first place, and his implementation uses RSA, I believe the RSA algorithm. And Wagner algorithm is a variant on Chaum that uses DSA instead of RSA and was not known to be protected by any patent. That was what interested me the most about it, was I didn't want to put patented software into my project. Of course, at this point, the Chaum patent itself has expired, and so that could be used as well. In open transactions, you have a series of instruments, financial instruments for performing financial transactions, checks, cashier's checks, payment plans that do recurring payments, markets, you can trade on markets, and cash. And the cash instrument, it's basically digital analog to using cash at a normal bank, right? At a normal bank, you have a bank balance, you can withdraw cash, you can deposit cash, you can give cash to someone else, he can deposit cash, and the bank supposedly can't tell where it came from because it's cash. Well, this is the same functionality that you get when you use blind signatures. So in open transactions, you could have some account balance, you can withdraw cash, right? You can give the cash to someone else, he can deposit the cash. Now the server can see that I'm withdrawing cash. It can see basically see a bunch of people, all its users, all withdrawing and depositing cash. But when someone deposits cash, you can't see the withdrawal where it came from. So there'll be receipts showing that I withdrew some cash, and maybe some receipts showing that someone else deposited some cash, but there's no way to link the two, that he's depositing cash that he got from me. And that's fully functional. If you guys go to opentransactions.org and then click About, there's a bunch of videos, and if you look at our desktop videos or our iPhone videos, I'm actually demonstrating the cash withdrawal, cash deposit. And with a desktop app, you can do a little more. Like once you withdraw some cash, you can export it, because you may not want to send it directly through OT. You may want to export it and then, print it on a piece of paper or stick it on a USB stick or whatever you want to do. Send it through an encrypted email or something. You can export the cash, and then the cash itself will get encrypted either to a specific public key if you want, or to a passphrase, and then you can give it to anyone and they can deposit again if they know the passphrase. Now, I implemented the cash through a abstract interface, which means that it's possible to use other implementations of cash without really changing the rest of the open transactions code. So we have an abstract base class, OT mint and OT token. And then I have subclasses, OT mint lucre and OT token lucre. And that way, if we ever wanted to add another cache algorithm and another cache algorithm, that would just be another subclass off that same interface. There's one implementation that I've been thinking about adding, because it's available, is Adam Back. Adam Back wrote a library called CredLib. And CredLab makes it possible to use Chom's algorithm. Like I said, I'm using Wagner. It makes it possible to use Chom's algorithm, and he also provides an implementation of Stefan Brand's algorithm. Stefan Brand, who I think now works for Microsoft. And so at some point soon, it's possible, once we get that library added in, that we'll be able to support Chom and Brands in addition to our existing implementation that uses Wagner. Any other questions?
Yeah, right here. I had a
John Light.
John Light. Yes, sir. Nice to see you, Chris.
Nice to see you.
I had two questions. They're completely unrelated, so I'll just ask the second one after you answer the first one. The first one is, let me think about what it was. Yeah. So what kind of entities do you see acting as open transaction servers, particularly like from a regulatory standpoint? You can ignore that if you want, but like who do you envision operating servers, and what exactly do they fall under in terms of like a business classification?
Well, I mean, there's different laws in every jurisdiction. Well, first of all, let's break the entities out into two broad groups. One group is going to be entities who are regulated, and one group is going to be entities who are not regulated. This is open source software, right? There's nothing really stopping someone from taking an OT server and running it.
Right.
Right? Someone could get on Tor and run an OT server. And so technically speaking, you could have a completely unregulated entity running an OT server on Tor. And thanks to the existence of Bitcoin, he could do so at a profit. So there's nothing really to stop these sorts of unregulated entities from operating. There are also going to be plenty of regulated entities they're running legitimate businesses, and they're feeling competitive pressure to use this software. And then they use it, and that doesn't mean that they're necessarily breaking any laws. I mean, the software itself is not an illegal thing. When Show Me in Cash was first invented, for example, I believe the first licensee was a bank. It was actually licensed by a normal bank just to do financial transactions. So, of course, you guys have probably heard a lot about the voting pools technology that we're building that enables an OT server to store your coins without being able to steal them. So you could put your coins up in the OT server can't steal the coins, and then you can do market trading, smart contracts, escrow agreements, all these sorts of things. And so I believe that that's going to create a very powerful competitive pressure for other exchanges to follow suit. If you have 3 or 4 exchanges and all of them, or most of them say you have to trust them with your money, which that's a big thing for me. Trust them with my money, right? If you have to trust them with your money, and then there's this one where you don't have to trust them with your money, which one are you going to use, right? And therefore, I believe that that's going to create a lot of competitive pressure for the next one to start using it, and the next one to start using it, just because otherwise they're going to lose their customers to other systems that don't require so much trust. And a lot of these exchanges, they're perfectly legitimate. They operate openly. Look at, for example, Bitstamp. Bitstamp is compliant with all the rules and regulations. They operate openly. They're probably registered in whatever Eastern European country they're in as a legitimate business. You can serve them with something if you want to serve them with paperwork. They're available to do that. And even if they feel someday in the future, this is just hypothetical, right? If they feel some competitive pressure to use some better software on the back end, they're still a perfectly legitimate business. And so, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks. And so anyone on a server can start to issue currencies, or can only the server issue currencies?
Well, that's a configuration flag. If you download OT and build it, then you can create whatever currency contracts you want as a user and issue them as currencies onto that server. And then, when I first looked at Loom, for example, Loom had 400 different currencies issued there, something like that. I was amazed. I thought, oh, this is separation of powers. You can have the issuer and the transaction server should be separate entities, right? And so, what am I getting to here with this? What was your question again?
It was just, is it just the server that is issuing currencies? Or
that's basically a configuration flag, because normally if you download OT, any user can just issue currencies, right? But the server can also turn that off. Maybe he only wants 3 or 4 currencies traded there, that he has deals with these people or whatever, and he just turns it off, and then he only allows a couple people to issue, and that's it. Or he could just let anyone issue whatever they want, right? Which is actually his incentive to do, because he just makes transaction fees, right? So technically speaking, as a server operator, all you're doing is processing receipts for people. He's not actually holding any of the money. He's not holding any of the Bitcoins. He's just processing receipts for people. So given that he gets paid to do that, he has an incentive to have as many currencies issued there as possible so that he can process as many receipts as possible and make as many fees.
Cool. And my first question actually has to do with the voting pools. So I was wondering if you could explain how the multi-sig voting pools would work, like when exchanges have this multi-sig pool, how does it work when they want to just not spend the whole transaction that has been added to the pool, but like smaller transactions, like the cumulative deposits are 100 Bitcoins, but people only want to withdraw, a small portion of that at a time. Is there a way to make it so that only a small amount is?
It's actually basically the same as a normal Bitcoin transfer. So let's say that you transfer me 100 Bitcoins, and then I want to send 1 Bitcoin to someone. Mm-hmm. So there's 99 Bitcoins left. And so what happens is when you spend that, you have 2 outputs. You have one output, which is the 1 coin going to the recipient. Then you have another output, which is the 99 coins going back to myself again as a new input, and then I can spend that later. So it's the same thing. When you have coins going into a multi-sig pool, and then let's say you have 100 coins going to the pool at a specific input, if you want to take one of those coins out, then the other 99 will just be sent back to the pool again. So when the pool members vote to release the coins, they're voting to release 1 coin to the recipient and 99 coins back to the pool.
Okay, and what kind of criteria do you imagine would be necessary to authorize such a withdrawal? Like, because a server could say, "Oh yeah, my customer is authorizing a withdrawal. Please sign this transaction," but maybe it didn't actually happen.
Right. Well, first of all, I like to sort of divide this into 2 areas. One area is, could you forge the receipts? And then the other area is, could you inflate the currency? Because these are the only 2 real possible crimes in OT. In OT, it's absolutely impossible for a server to forge your receipt, because you're the one who creates and signs your receipt first. He just verifies it and then countersigns it, and that's the receipt. So he can't forge any receipt because he can't forge your signature. And so what that means is that inflation is the only possible crime. It's because, let's say the server's inflating the currency, he doesn't have to forge your receipt to do that.
Yeah, he wouldn't.
Right.
He'd just make his own receipts.
He'd just make his own dummy receipt.
Yeah.
Exactly right. He'd make his own dummy receipt, sign it for himself, and inflate the currency. Of course, he still can't falsify any of the receipts of the actual users, but he can create a dummy account and inflate. So what is the incentive for the server not to inflate? The incentive is that the server should be audited. Now specifically, let's say that I want to go and pull some money out of the pool. So I send a withdrawal request to my server, hey, I want to pull some money out of the pool, signed Chris, and the server verifies it, countersigns it, then we send it to the pool members. The pool members verify it. Normally they would just say, oh, well, the user signed it and the server signed it, so therefore let them have their money out of the pool. But what if he's inflating? And that's why all the servers in the pool have to be auditing each other. And this voting pool software includes an auditing server. The auditing server, which the transaction server doesn't actually know where the auditing server is, but they're able to communicate over channels where they can't locate each other physically. So we don't want a hacker to be able to get in the transaction server, say, and then from there get his way to the audit server, of course. So each one of these servers is running an auditing server, which is auditing all the other transaction servers in real time. So they always know if the audit's clean, which it should continually be over time. It should be a clean audit, clean audit. The second that the audit's not clean, we have a serious problem that should never, ever actually happen unless something funny is going on. And if that happens, then they would probably vote to boot that server out of the pool. And of course, he couldn't steal anything because he can't get his hands on the pool, so he has very little incentive to do that because he has no way of getting paid for it. In fact, what he would do is he would lose a bunch of money because he was making transaction fees every day that he suddenly stops getting, right? And so the servers are auditing each other in real time. They know if the audit is clean on all the other servers constantly. They constantly know this. And so whenever the time comes to pull some money out, it's clean, both people signed it, release the funds, and they vote on the chain. And typically, the way it should normally go is 100% always vote the exact same way. Why would they vote anything different, right?
It sounds really clean, and I've heard you talk about these ideas for a long time. Just a word to the entrepreneurs in the audience. I don't put money on exchanges because they don't use something like this. If you want me and people like me as a customer, implement this, please. This is like a 2 or 3 year old idea now. Thank you, Chris.
I think the reason we haven't seen a lot of other systems implementing this is because the OT side is necessary to make it work.
Well, the library has been more or less ready for people to pick up and implement for a while now, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, we have testers.
You guys are doing good work, that's all I can say.
We've been doing a lot of work. But I mean, the only way that you can safely vote to release funds is if you know that the audit's clean. And the only way you can know the audit's clean is if you have unforgeable receipts. So I don't know if there's any other systems out there that have these sorts of receipts. I think the OT side basically is just as important as the Bitcoin side to making it work. So I think that's why we haven't seen it yet. Because otherwise, actually for the longest time, I asked myself that. I'm like, how come no one's using this? Why isn't it, this is crazy. And then I thought, oh, maybe they can't.
Well, if we have the time, can you tell us a little bit about Monetos and what you guys are doing over there?
Monetos is doing very well. We're growing. We're up to about 10 people. And we've been receiving investment. We just closed our second round. And I'm moving off to Switzerland to build a company.
Awesome.
And thank you. Any other questions? Y'all are hungry? All right, you guys, thank you very much, and I hope you have a great dinner.